Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Henry Ainslie and I'm the editor of the Helensburgh Advertiser. And I'd like to welcome you to this fine surround of the Victoria Hall for the first ever Advertiser Big Debate. Welcome also to those listening on your radio and through our online stream, and also to those following live updates on Twitter and through our website. I'm delighted to see so much interest in what promises to be an exciting and engaging debate on the most pressing issue affecting the town and surrounding area, the future of Her Majesty's Naval Base Clyde, or Faslane as it's better known. The Clyde's deep waters and easy access to the Atlantic made Faslane and Coolport an ideal place to base the Royal Navy's submarines and warheads against the backdrop of the Cold War. And over the years, the base has brought generations of submariners, naval personnel, civilian workers and their families to Helensburgh, many of whom have made the area their home. But in the years since, the global political climate has changed. And there are those nationally and locally, including the Scottish Government, who say there is no room for the UK's Trident nuclear deterrent on the shores of the Clyde or anywhere else in Scotland. Nevertheless, the Westminster Government is planning a replacement for Trident ahead of the end of its lifespan in 2028, potentially costing billions of pounds. For these reasons, Trident's future will be a key issue ahead of next year's referendum on Scottish independence, which the SNP's defence spokesman Angus Robertson says presents the only opportunity to guarantee Trident's removal. However, were that to happen, no community in Scotland stands to be affected more than Helensburgh and Lomond. The base is Scotland's biggest employer, with some 6,700 posts and a further 1,500 due by 2022. Labour estimates there are thousands more jobs depending on the base indirectly. The Westminster Government Scottish Affairs Committee reported last month that if Trident were to be removed from Scotland, as the Scottish Government has clearly stated it intends to do in the event of a yes vote next year, then the Royal Navy's entire fleet will go with it, casting a huge shadow over the future of the base. Indeed, the removal of Trident has been described by no campaigners as delivering a fatal blow to thousands of jobs on the Clyde and throughout Scotland. The impact of such a move on the Helensburgh community would be huge. It would affect everyone from the servicemen and women who would have to leave their homes, to the businesses that rely on trade from the base, to families looking to sell their homes. Even children at the area schools who would need to leave their friends would feel the impact. Life would change for all of them. The Scottish Government insists there is a bright future for Faslane after Trident in the shape of a conventional Scottish Navy. But what would that consist of? The Westminster Government says it will cost billions to move the Trident fleet, but who would pick up the bill? These and countless other questions must be answered, and we hope to explore as many of them as possible tonight. Over the next hour or so, we will hear from representatives of each major political party, and you will have the chance to put your questions direct to them. On the panel tonight, may I introduce Labour's Shadow Defence Secretary, Jim Murphy MP, representing the Scottish Government, Cunningham North MSP Kenneth Gibson. For the Liberal Democrats, Argyll and Bute MP Alan Reid. Former Scottish Conservative leader and current West of Scotland MSP Anibal Goldie. And last, but by no means least, celebrated journalist, broadcaster and commentator Ruth Wishart, who is also a resident of Kilcreggan. In the first half of tonight, we will hear statements from each of the panellists, after which there will be a short interval, allowing you to take advantage of the refreshments provided by our friends at Victoria Hall. And then in the second half, there will be a question and answer session where you will have your chance to put your questions to the panellists. So first of all, may I introduce Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Henry. I'm delighted to be here in Helensburgh speaking of this very important issue for Scotland and, of course, for this community and neighbouring communities. From the Scottish National Party's point of view, the foreign, security and defence policy of Scotland should always be determined by the Scottish Government and Parliament and always reflect the priorities of people living in Scotland. An independent Scotland will be outward-looking, open, fair and tolerant, contributing to peace, justice and equality. By mobilising our assets and the goodwill and recognition Scotland enjoys in the world, we will help prevent and tackle insecurity in the world for this and future generations. The SNP reiterates its commitment to non-nuclear defence, international law, the United Nations and finding solutions to regional and global challenges. While military threats to Scotland are low, it is important to maintain appropriate security and defence arrangements and capabilities. This includes a cyber security and intelligence infrastructure to deal with new threats and protection of key national, economic and social infrastructure. Scotland is a maritime nation with some 11,000 miles of coastline, including nearly 800 islands, critical undersea and offshore infrastructure, and an area of responsibility extending far into the North Sea and out into the Atlantic Ocean. The SNP recognises our national responsibilities as a Northern European nation to work with our neighbours to fulfil current defence obligations and improve collective regional security. Environmental changes in the high North and Arctic region raise significant challenges and responsibilities which Scotland shares. Scotland will require military capabilities to fulfil these responsibilities, which should be provided by a Scottish Defence and peacekeeping services answerable to the Scottish people through its government and parliament. An independent Scottish Government, if led by the SNP, will commit to an annual defence and security budget of £2.5 billion, an increase of more than £700 million on what is spent currently by the UK in Scotland, but less than £1 billion of Scotland's taxpayers' current contribution to UK defence spending. Our armed forces will comprise of 15,000 regular and 5,000 reserve personnel operating under Joint Forces Headquarters based at Faslane, which will also be Scotland's main conventional naval facility. All current bases will be retained to accommodate units organised into one regular and one reserve multi-role brigade, and the Air Force will operate from Lossiemouth and Lookers. Regular ground forces will include restored Scottish regiments, support units, special forces and marines who will retain responsibility for offshore protection. Our armed forces will focus on territorial defence and support for the international community, and the multi-role brigade structure and interoperable air and sea assets will provide deployable capabilities for UN-sanctioned missions and support of humanitarian peacekeeping and peacemaking. Scottish Defence Forces will initially be equipped with Scotland's share of current assets, including ocean-going vessels, jets for domestic air patrol duties, transport aircraft, helicopters, plus army vehicles, artillery, defence systems and the like. A Scottish Defence industrial strategy and procurement plan will fill UK capability gaps in Scotland, addressing the lack of new frigates, conventional submarines and maritime patrol aircraft. Joint procurement and shared conventional basing, training and logistics arrangements will be pursued with the rest of the UK and other allies. This includes military capabilities, setting priorities and coordination to provide economic synergies, job stability and value for the taxpayer. Scotland will not host nuclear weapons, and a sovereign SNP government will negotiate the speedy, safe transition of the nuclear fleet from Faslane and its replacement by conventional naval forces. Security cooperation in our region functions primarily through NATO, regarded as a keystone defence organisation by Denmark, Norway, Iceland and the UK. We want Scotland to fulfil its full responsibilities to neighbours and allies, and on independence we will inherit NATO treaty obligations, and an SNP government will maintain NATO membership subject to agreement that nuclear weapons will be removed. And NATO continues to respect the right of members to take part in only UN-sanctioned operations. In the absence of such an agreement, Scotland will work with NATO as a member of the Partnership for Peace programme with Sweden, Finland, Austria and Ireland. Scotland will be a full member of the Common Security and Defence Policy of the European Union, an organisation for cooperation and security in Europe. So Faslane will remain under the SNP. We believe that numbers of service personnel and civilian jobs will remain roughly equivalent to as they are now, and we believe that the defence industry in Scotland will have a bright and indeed a better future under independence than within the UK framework as at present.
Thank you very much, Kenny. Next we have Argyll and Bute MP, Alan Reid.
Right, thank you, Henry. And I would first of all want to thank the Helensburgh Advertiser for organising this debate this evening, and the Friends of Victoria Halls for making the hall available. I'm also delighted to see the large turnout this evening. I think that just shows how important this debate is to Helensburgh and the surrounding area. I mean, there will be two visions for the future of Scotland will be put forward this evening. We can remain part of the Union. We know what the future of Faslane will be like as part of the Union, because Faslane will become the base for all of Britain's submarines. That means that even after the defence cuts, the UK will always have a large fleet of submarines, and there will be sustained job prospects here at Faslane and in the surrounding area. And independent analysis by Scottish Enterprise a few years ago demonstrated that there were 11,000 jobs in the local economy dependent on Faslane. That's once you take into account the people who work there, plus the jobs created by small contractors and the spending power of the Faslane workers. So if we stay in the UK, we know that these jobs are secure. But let's think what will happen if Scotland votes yes in the referendum. We know that all the submarines will leave as quickly as possible. I'm a member of the Scottish Affairs Select Committee at Westminster. Our analysis was that would probably take about 2 years. So there would be 2 years of work in decommissioning, and then that work would come to an end. And let's look at what an independent Scotland's Navy would be like. Well, we can look at our near neighbours. Our near neighbour Ireland, a country that was part of the SNP's Ark of Prosperity. What does the Irish Navy consist of? 8 patrol boats. And for a small country like Ireland and like Scotland, that is a sensible size of a navy. That's what can be afforded. And let's forget about all the nonsense we got from Kenny earlier about having a navy like the size of Denmark, Norway or Sweden. If you want a navy that size, look at the taxation rates people in Scandinavian countries are paying. You will only get a navy that size if you're prepared to pay Scandinavian taxes. Rubbish. And who wants to pay 15% more in taxes? Because that's what you would pay if you were in Scandinavia. And let's look at what this Scottish Navy would actually be doing. The strategic interests for Scotland would lie in the North Sea. That's where the prime fishing grounds are. That's where the oil rigs are. But just think that there's an incident on an oil rig at the North Sea and your patrol boat's based at Faslane. It's got to sail all the way down the Clyde, round the Mull of Kintyre, all the way up the west coast of Scotland, through the Pentland Firth. Eventually it will get to the North Sea. It's obvious that these patrol boats are not all going to be based at Faslane, and East Coast Port is the obvious place for them to go. Forsyth or Aberdeen or Lerwick, that's where I would expect at least half the Scottish Navy to be, and the rest at Faslane. So even if Scotland has a slightly bigger navy than Ireland, say 12 patrol boats, there's only going to be, I would say, about 6 based at Faslane, the rest on the East Coast. So I think you can work out what that's going to mean for job prospects here in the west of Scotland. I think there's a stark choice. If you vote for the SNP in the referendum, you lose the Royal Navy, you'll get half of a patrol boat navy and mass redundancies. Or you can keep the Union, the Royal Navy, and secure a future for thousands of jobs.
Thank you very much, Alan Reid. Next up, Anibal Goldie.
Henry, thank you very much indeed. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for inviting me to be here this evening. I think this is a great opportunity for politicians to engage with you, the people. And I think defence clearly is hugely important for this area for very obvious reasons, some of which we've already heard referred to. But, you know, to me, defence is actually one slice of the whole cake that I think adds up to a very important argument for retaining the partnership which is the United Kingdom. And I just want to explain to you why I feel there are benefits in that arrangement. A partnership does 2 things. A partnership enables you to both pool talent and resource and to maximise influence. A partnership also enables you to both share and spread risk and to accept a joint and collective responsibility for the balance of risk. And let me try and illustrate what I'm talking to you, what I mean by that. When I say we can pool talents and resources, I think you only have to look at what the success of the United Kingdom has been. It's regarded as one of the most spectacularly successful social and economic unions the world has ever seen. And together we have, as we know, we've defeated Nazism, we've helped oppression, we've endeavoured to fight against terrorism. And we've done that as component parts within the UK. And I think the other thing that's obvious is that as part of the United Kingdom, when it comes to that influence question, how do we exercise influence? Because whether or not defence is relevant, and Alan was just talking about this, is actually dependent on what you're doing, both nationally and internationally as a country. And I would argue that with the influence which we exercise as a United Kingdom, whether that's within the EU, whether it's on NATO, whether it's as part of the United Nations Security Council as one of the 5 permanent members, or whether it is part part of the G8 group of countries. The United Kingdom is an extremely influential international player, and we are part of that. And that all leads into the relevance of having a defence policy and having a well-resourced and comprehensively strategic defence facility. And what I would say to you is, in this area, when I look at the assets and the benefits of being part of the United Kingdom, which is manifest in what you have at Faslane, and I accept some people will feel strongly about the Trident nuclear deterrent, very strongly indeed. I understand that. But what I would say is that I think that deterrent has been necessary in the post-war period. I think it has been effective in maintaining, on the whole, world peace. And yes, one fine day, indeed, you might find me and Ruth Wishart at the same march, I would love to see multilateral nuclear disarmament. I would love to see that. But I don't think the way to achieve that is single-handedly, as Kenny's advocating, to declare independence, rip ourselves apart from the United Kingdom and close down Trident at Faslane. And the reason I say that, ladies and gentlemen, is I think that's very unwise in strategic terms for the defence of the United Kingdom and our contribution to world stability. I think it's very, very unwise and very unwelcome for this local area because, as we know, Faslane, as Alan was already explaining, is a hugely important contributor to this area. With the 11,000 jobs, with the wider spend into the local economy, with what that means for you locally, I think that cannot be underestimated in terms of significance. I do not accept Kenny's equation that in a independent Scotland post-Trident you would have the same number of jobs. I just do not see that happening. I do not see it possible to maintain a comparable facility in terms of skills and numbers of people employed. And that is why I think when such an important contributor to your local economy here as that base, which I believe is responsible for about a quarter of your full-time workforce, I think the best way to protect that, to protect Scotland, and to protect that partnership which has benefited us all is to remain within the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much, Anibal. Ruth Wishart.
Thank you very much, Henry. For me, ladies and gentlemen, there's kind of three main issues with the controversy over the ongoing strategic defence review and the plan to replace the Trident fleet. And the first is a moral one. We haven't actually heard much about that tonight. But building a new generation of Trident drives a coach and horses through the Non-Proliferation Treaty to which we're a signatory. Now, this treaty obliges us to work towards the cessation of the nuclear arms race and towards global nuclear disarmament. What kind of message does buying a new Trident fleet send to the world about our fulfilling these commitments? How can we demand that Iran and North Korea and other potentially rogue states set aside their nuclear ambitions whilst we build up and modernise our own supply? And how does that build-up represent working towards nuclear disarmament? More importantly, ladies and gentlemen, how can we defend housing weapons of mass destruction which contravene other important international conventions? Because, by definition, weapon systems like Trident cannot distinguish between combatants and civilians if they're deployed. Why would any civilised nation want to house these weapons, let alone deploy them? And why, anyway, would anybody throw money at a system which is entirely dependent on American components, American compliance and training? The idea that we could ever press a button unilaterally is frankly a complete fantasy. And then there's the question of deterrence, which Anibal has just brought up. Apparently we must have these weapons because we must protect ourselves against all possible threats. Well, let's take a look at recent threats, ladies and gentlemen. Let's take a look at 9/11 and 7/7 and at how modern terrorism and threats operate. Not only did our nuclear fleet fail to protect us from these atrocities, but they failed to scare them off. Just this very evening there was a news report about some men sent to jail because they had plotted 8 rucksack bombs which would have had more carnage than 7/7 by some measure. Suicide bombers, ladies and gentlemen, don't sit in their bedrooms shivering in their shoes at the thought of nuclear annihilation because they've already arranged for their own deaths. But they might well sit in their bedrooms contemplating Faslane or Coolport as high-profile targets while they continue to house this nuclear arsenal. Let's remember a bit about Trident, ladies and gentlemen. It was designed to hit Moscow during the Cold War, and if it ever heated up. It's a weapon system for yesterday's wars, and it's been clung to by today's admirals who like to have these monstrous virility symbols in their toy box. And the odd thing is, you won't find much enthusiasm from the generals and the air vice marshals about Trident. In fact, you won't find much enthusiasm from one of Alan's colleagues, Sir Nick Harvey, who was removed from his post as Armed Services Minister in the last reshuffle, despite, or perhaps because of his being in charge of the Strategic Defence Review. Now freed from his ministerial shackles, he told us last month, and I quote, "The current plan is to spend between 25 billion and 30 billion building 4 vast new submarines whose sole purpose will be to patrol the high seas 24/7, wagging a nuclear bomb at no one in particular." The army knows full well that they are fighting different kinds of wars these days, and that pumping serious money into intelligence and gathering intelligence makes much more sense than spending billions on Trident, especially when those billions could have been used to stave off the salami slicing of our conventional forces. Just last month, the Army had to face another 5,300 job cuts, the biggest tranche of redundancies in some 20 years. And part of the reason for that, ladies and gentlemen, is that the MOD budget is hopelessly overstretched. And nothing will overstretch it more than spending billions on nuclear submarines. And as for the Air Force, how thrilled they must be at those intellectual giants in the MOD, none of whom apparently passed their O-grade arithmetic, judging by the hundreds of millions they've squandered on cost overruns on planes and boats, some of which became obsolete before they were completed. How many other countries do you know who design and build a plane and then literally take an axe to it before it takes to the skies? But that's what happened to the Nimrod spy plane. Commissioned in 1993, built at a cost of £4 billion, due to fly in 2012 and broken up for scrap in 2011. The RAF just loved that, just as they love the fact that we're throwing hundreds of millions of pounds at aircraft carriers when we've got no aircraft to put on them. You couldn't make it up.
Ruth Wishart, thank you very much. Jim Murphy.
Thank you very much, and it's lovely to be here. Thank you all for coming, and thanks to the Friends of the Halls for organising the refreshments that we're all going to enjoy straight after I finish. So I'll try and stick to my 4 minutes. I could speak less if you want. I'm standing between you and your tea. Look, I'm really pleased that we're here at last, not to be discussing who gets to vote, or discussing when we get to vote, or discussing what the question is we're going to vote, but at long last, we're starting to discuss some of the issues that we're going to have the vote around. And it's a great place to start because this is an epicentre of the debate, the biggest single employment site in the whole of Scotland. Nowhere else will be as affected as this community here, and the community faces really a choice of two futures. As Alan's already alluded to and Kenny's already acknowledged, in the UK, being the UK centre for all of our submarines, the new Astute-class submarines, the 7 of them that are currently being under construction in Barrow, the Vanguard successor-class submarines, which will be constructed in Barrow again but brought here, Faslane becoming the UK centre and a world-renowned centre for all of our submarines and a centre of expertise, the envy of most countries in the globe. For 50 years, that Van-class successor submarine will be based in this community. Think of that, a certainty of employment for 50 years. Think of that, the generations of apprentices who will have the chance to have that work. Think of that, those youngsters, teenagers who would start in Faslane today would retire still working in Faslane with that certainty of work. No other community, no other workforce, no other industry, no other town anywhere in Scotland has that degree of certainty over that period of time. And of course we're going to discuss the deterrent perhaps during questions. All I would say about this issue is we all want rid of nuclear weapons. There's nobody who fetishises nuclear weapons. Everyone wishes they had never been invented. It's a debate about what's the most effective way of reducing and then abolishing nuclear weapons across the globe. And I say to you, if you know with absolute certainty, without any doubt whatsoever, about what the next 50 years are going to hold for this country and across the globe, then give up our nuclear weapons tomorrow, if you know that with absolute certainty. But look back at the history of the last 50 years. Who could ever have predicted all the changes that we have seen, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the Arab Spring, Iran, North Korea and others, India, Pakistan, getting nuclear weapons? And if you think you're absolutely certain about the future and every day of the next 50 years that we won't face that sort of strategic threat, then give up the nuclear weapons. But if, as I do, I don't have I can absolute guarantee about what the future is going to hold, and that's why I want to negotiate away nuclear weapons with other countries in tandem so we can have, in time, a nuclear-free world. But this community faces a second choice, which is the one outside of the United Kingdom that Kenny has spoken about. And they won't say what type of navy the nationalists would have in the place of the Royal Navy, because it is clear, no one doubts it. If you leave the United Kingdom, you leave the Royal Navy. You leave the United Kingdom wouldn't want to have its fleet have submarines based here at Faslane. In the same way, if you leave the Royal Navy, they won't build complex warships in the River Clyde, because the River Clyde will be a foreign country to the Royal Navy, and the Royal Navy does not build complex warships in foreign countries. In this debate, like no other, the SNP have to be crystal clear, and yet they won't tell us how big their navy in an independent Scotland is going to be. They won't tell us either because they don't know, which is irresponsible, and or perhaps they do know, but they won't say, which is a cruel deception. Remember, this debate, this referendum, is like no other decision we've ever taken. It's not like an election. It's a one-way journey into the unknown. It's not like an election where you vote for my party, don't like them and throw them out, or Anibel's party, don't like them, throw them out, or don't vote for his party and they somehow get into government and you wonder how the heck to throw them out. I mean, it's not like any of that. It's not like an election. It's a one-way journey. There's no return. It's a one-way journey into the unknown. It's permanent and there's no going back. And we all know, and you know, the people who work in Faslane and the people who work in shipbuilding in the Clyde, you cannot pay families' bills on nationalist rhetoric. You cannot base an industrial future on SNP's wishful thinking. I'll just finish with this because I've been told to be quiet. Right? And we'll talk about it in questions. My general argument is this. I think independence and separation is a noble idea. When it comes to defence, it's a noble idea of the 19th century, which is ill-suited to the complexity and the demands and the time in which we live. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jim Murphy.